Death at Gallows Green. Chapter 5. Once upon a time there was a very beautiful doll's house. It was red brick with white windows, and it had real muslin curtains and a front door and a chimney. Beatrix Potter, A Tale of Two Bad Mice. Betsy sat in the corner between the coal box and the fire, her back turned toward the room, her collie dog Kip asleep on the floor beside her. In front of her was the dollhouse. It was 2 stories, and its wooden front and sides were painted to look like red brick, with windows painted on and 2 clever balconies, a front door that really opened, and a chimney. It had been made for her by her father, and her mother had made the curtains out of scraps from her sewing box and had knitted the parlour rug of the wool left from Betsy's Christmas mittens. Auntie Mabel, who was in service to a great lady in Brighton, and earned pots of money and got a new dress every Boxing Day, had sent her a table and chairs, a bed and a sofa, and a little wooden box full of shavings that also contained 2 red lobsters, a ham, a fish, a pudding, and some pears and oranges that would not come off the plates, but made the dining table look utterly splendid. Taken all in all, the doll house was much grander than any real home in the entire hamlet of Gallows Green. Betsy, who was not a domestic child nor given to doll, loved it, not least because she had watched her father make it, and he had permitted her to paint the tiny bricks as well as the white roses that twined over the front door. Into this admiring reverie her mother's voice intruded. Betsy, where are you?" Kep raised his head. Betsy gravely considered the question. She was probably wanted to run an errand, perhaps to the grocer, to get some starch for father's shirts. Last time her mother had given her 3 pence for a pack of Robin's starch, and an extra halfpenny for an ounce of Fairley's chocolate drops to be shared with the dolls Lucinda and Jane. Of course, Lucinda and Jane had the lobsters and a fish and a ham, not to mention the fruit and the pudding. So Betsy had eaten the chocolate drops, all except one, which she shared with Kep. She thought of offering one to Jemima, her pet dog, but did not, for fear that chocolate might not be good for Jemima's digestion. "Betsy," her mother called again, louder now. There was an odd note of urgency in her summons. Betsy shoved Lucinda and Jane into their bedroom, although it was much too late in the day for naps, and pushed the dollhouse against the wall. Perhaps she would not get chocolate drops after all, but humbugs striped and flavoured with peppermints. She mentally counted the pence knotted in a bit of cloth behind the loose skirting board in a corner of the loft. Or perhaps she would forego the humbugs and apply the halfpenny to the hoop she coveted, an iron one with a proper stick with a nail in it, like her friend Baxter's. Girls had wooden hoops and bowled them with hedge-sticks or their hands. Betsy coveted an iron one with a real stick. Betsy got up and went into the kitchen, Kep trailing behind her. The kitchen was her favourite place to be, if you didn't count the shed where her father made things of wood and mended broken crockery and whistled while he sharpened his gardening tools. There were such wonderful things hung on the shed's walls: rakes and hoes and shovels and saws and ropes and pulleys and even a shiny galvanized watering can. It was also where Jemima Puddledog spent the night with Mr. Brown, whom Betsy had rescued as a tiny owlet from Mr. Wilkins's fierce grey tabby. But the kitchen was where her mother reigned, like the queen, but ever so much younger and prettier, of course, over her empire. With its fresh painted walls and bright hearth rug, the cheerful coal fire and the stove that had been set into the old fireplace, and the even more cheerful scented pelargoniums blooming at the casement window, flung open now to catch the May breeze. The kitchen was a palace to Betsy. She scarcely noticed that the ceiling was so low her father had to stoop, or the table so tiny the 3 of them sat elbow to elbow at their meals. For always at one end of the table was her mother, cheeks shining, and the other end was her father, beard combed, eyes twinkling, and she in the middle, with Kep under her bare feet, and Jemima making small quacks outside the door, and sleepy Mr. Brown nodding on his perch in the shed. No matter that the flagstone floor was cold and damp, or that the eaves were low and the roof merely thatched. To Betsy, this was better than Buckingham Palace. Her mother was in the kitchen now, sitting beside the scrubbed wooden table. To Betsy's surprise, 2 men were with her, both standing. One whom she didn't recognize was very tall and lean, as tall as her father, with brown eyes like Fairly's chocolate drops, and hair and beard the exact same color of her father's tobacco. He was wearing a heavy khaki coat with dozens of pockets, and every one of them filled, to judge from the interesting lumps and bulges. The other man was short and slender, with sandy hair, a round, ruddy face, and a uniform like her father's. His navy serge brushed, its buttons polished like the lucky gold sovereign her father wore on his watch chain, which she sometimes let her hold when she had a stomachache. "Hello, Uncle Ned," she said. She frowned a little. His grey eyes were not smiling, as they usually did. His brows were pulled together and his face troubled. Her mother's mouth, too, was set. She pinched her lips together and her eyes had a queer look. Uncle Ned squatted down in front of her. "I find, Betsy, that I'm in need of tobacco for my pipe." He opened his palm and held out three three-penny bits. "Would you be so kind as to run to the green grocer and get me 4 pence worth? You may use what is left to buy a sweet for yourself." Betsy did a bit of quick mental arithmetic. She would have 5 pence left. With that and the coins and the bit of the cloth, she could buy the hoop. Betsy looked to her mother for confirmation and got a quick, hard nod of the head. Still, she did not move. Something was wrong, she knew it. Kep knew it too, with an unerring sense that dogs have for things gone wrong. She could feel him crowding close against her, quivering. She swallowed. "Must I go now?" she asked her mother. "I want to stay and—" "Betsy," her mother said in a strange, tight voice. "Betsy, your father—" The very tall man stepped forward. "Let me introduce myself, Mrs. Oliver," he said, with great courtesy. "My name is Sir Charles Sheridan." Betsy narrowed her eyes, forgetting for the moment her uneasiness. She had never before been personally introduced to a sir, although she saw the gentry every week, riding helter-skelter down the high street on skittish horses, brandishing riding crops and shouting arrogantly at the villagers who got in their way. She herself had often been pinned against the churchyard wall by the horses. She had no admiration for the gentry. "How fortunate that you are going to the Green Grocer's," Sir Charles remarked. "Your errand reminds me that I meant to buy a button for my coat." He bent over and showed her his sleeve, from which indeed a button was missing. "If you will permit me, Miss Oliver, I will accompany you to the grocer's. There, perhaps, she would be so kind as to inquire after a proper button for me." Betsy sighed. Really, the gentry, why they couldn't take care of themselves instead of always depending on other people to do it for them. She looked up just in time to glimpse the unmistakable grateful look that Uncle Ned gave to Sir Charles, and the naked loss in her mother's tear-filled eyes. Her heart stopped, and she had forgot all about a hoop and the proper button for Sir Charles's coat.